CeeDee Lamb is the biggest dynasty winner for the Dallas Cowboys this year. How close is he to taking over wide receiver one in your dynasty leagues? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Behind the Steel Curtain and Pro Football Focus. On today's show, we are recapping the 2023 season for my Dallas Cowboys, talking about the biggest dynasty winners, dynasty losers, and players that you should be trying to acquire this offseason. Listen, let's start with the positives because we need to be positive about this Cowboys team. They did win 12 games. They did make it to the playoffs for the third year in a row. We're not going to talk about the results in the playoffs, but it does feel like CeeDee Lamb has to be one of the biggest dynasty winners, not just for the Cowboys, but across the NFL.
Across all of the NFL, Marcus, wide receiver one in fantasy football this year in half PPR formats. And Marcus, I have to say, very impressed with CeeDee Lamb, very impressed with especially what he did in the second half of the season. Now, you look at CeeDee Lamb's stats in weeks 6 to 18. That is a 12-game span. But all of the stats that he accumulated, like if we just extrapolated them and put them like that 12-game sample size over, in comparison to most players' full seasons, that 12-game span, his stats would have ranked fourth in receptions, fourth in receiving yards, third in receiving touchdowns. I mean, CeeDee Lamb literally had himself a full NFL season within the final 12 weeks of the regular season. That is absolutely incredible. And what I do think kind of wins out with CeeDee Lamb and part of why he's a winner outside of the incredible production is that we saw continued involvement from the tight end position. Jake Ferguson, a big part of that game plan. We saw an evolving role for Brandon Cooks in the second half of the season. And that only seemed to fuel CeeDee Lamb's fire and open things up more for him across the middle of the field. To know that he can produce in this way when he's not the only player being force-fed targets, I think that is what is one of the most encouraging things about CeeDee Lamb this year.
Yeah, I mean, his numbers were up across the board. And the first month and a half of the season had good numbers, but from that point on, just absolutely dominant. We should mention the rushing yards. Still had 113 rushing yards, had multiple rushing touchdowns. Kate, he finished the season with 1,862 total yards. He had 13 touchdowns. I mean, he was unbelievable. And I think what was so impressive about the way that he did it is he was just so efficient. It wasn't like he was getting 215 targets and he was inefficient. Like he was averaging, 10 yards a target. He was efficient anytime he got the ball in his hands. And it's why I want to ask you about where should we value CeeDee Lamb. So going into the year, his ADP was right around 5 overall. Wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. Now his ADP, his overall ADP is 1.67. The only player that has a higher ADP is Justin Jefferson, which totally understandable. However, I think CeeDee Lamb's situation is a little bit more stable than what Justin Jefferson's is.
I mean, from a quarterback perspective, and this is where your expertise from the Locked On Cowboys can come in here a little bit, because there are people after this season, obviously everybody was calling for the head of Mike McCarthy after they lost here in the wild card round. But there are people that said, okay, so Dak Prescott can't advance in the NFL playoffs, off with his head as well. And I don't see anything that came out of this season that would indicate that it would be a smart decision from the Cowboys to look in any other direction but that of Dak Prescott. And
they're not going to.
They're not going to. Like, why would they ever? He does. I'm going to say he gives you that stability at the quarterback position that Justin Jefferson does not have. But if we go, I mean, there's an entire realm of possibilities here, right? Like maybe the Vikings trade up for a quarterback. Maybe the Vikings re-sign Kirk Cousins, which I think
that's the best.
Would very much behoove them to do. I think they would be absolutely insane not to be trying to get Kirk Cousins back in Minnesota, because I think we saw, as soon as Kirk Cousins was out of the picture last year, dealing with those inconsistencies, you're going to be rolling the dice. Obviously, you're going to be better set up for the quarterback. Your quarterback position going to be better set up if you address it ahead of the regular season. They weren't planning to be without Kirk Cousins, so obviously having the offseason to plan for a potential absence would presumably go a little better. But I still think you're rolling the dice. Like, you have the receiving weapons. You have arguably one of the best wide receiver duos in the National Football League. You have a quarterback at the ready who can deliver them a ball and who I think wants to stay in Minnesota if they can just get a reasonable price tag, which I think 2 years, $90 million is more than reasonable for the kind of production that we've seen out of Kirk, especially in this offense. They're going to, presumably they'd be rolling the dice. So I think if you look at the realm of available circumstances here in Minnesota and the risk that they could be taking with the quarterback position, that would be the only question mark surrounding this discussion about Justin Jefferson. Because for me, he's so clear-cut dynasty wide receiver one.
Can I give you a couple other reasons that maybe, I'm not saying that should tilt you in favor of CD, but maybe make it a little bit closer. They did just spend a first-round pick on Jordan Addison, and everything that we saw from Jordan Addison this year indicates that he's going to be an awesome player. Probably not enough to take away a bunch of targets from Jefferson, but something else to monitor. TJ Hawkinson, I know he got hurt at the end of the year, but he was having an awesome season all the way up until week 18 when he got hurt. So I think I like the weapons a little bit better in Minnesota than I do in Dallas long-term. And on top of that, we should mention the Cowboys quarterback situation. It's going to be Dak Prescott this year. It's going to be Dak Prescott for the next several years. We can discuss his playoff prowess, but in terms of regular season quarterback, he's very accurate. He's had exactly 410 completions in 2021 and 2023 that led the NFL. He's very accurate. And oh, by the way, the Cowboys actually have good backup quarterbacks with Cooper Rush and Trey Lance. So if something were to happen to Dak for a 4-game stretch, I don't think it's going to significantly hurt CeeDee Lamb. I think CeeDee Lamb is so clearly the number 2 receiver in Dynasty. And I am inching closer and closer to putting those guys 1A and 1B.
I think very fair. And if we were having this conversation before the season, I would have told you it was going to be an asinine discussion and pointless. I don't think it's asinine. I don't think it's a pointless discussion at this point. But I also think give it 3 months, and I think we're going to have a clear-cut answer here.
I agree.
Just how close CeeDee Lamb is to that number 1 spot, and it has everything to do with the situation in Minnesota.
Really quickly before we move on, I just want to say that I'm shocked at how cheap, quote unquote, cheap CeeDee Lamb is being traded for in some recent leagues. Here's a couple trades. CeeDee Lamb for Jonathan Taylor straight up. Get out of here.
CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah. CeeDee Lamb for a 2024 first round pick. I'm assuming that's a pretty high pick. And Tank Dell.
CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah. CeeDee Lamb for Jahmyr Gibbs, RB1, and Sam Laporta, tight end 1.
I'll lean Gibbs and Laporta there probably.
I think I'll take CeeDee there.
Just barely.
Yeah, I mean, that one's close, but send offers for CeeDee Lamb. There's going to be some natural Cowboys hate in your dynasty leagues just because it's the Dallas Cowboys. You might be able to get him 90 cents on the dollar just because he is a Dallas Cowboy. And maybe somebody is worried about the quarterback situation. That shouldn't be the case at all, though. Okay, let's talk about the biggest loser from the Dallas Cowboys during the 2023 season, because there certainly is one that comes to mind. We will get to him next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. That's why it's important to let that out, especially to someone who is unbiased in your life. So today I want to tell you how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking the same thing this week, and I talked about it last week. I don't really like Super Bowl parties. Even at the Super Bowl party that I was at on Sunday, all anybody cared about was the commercials. They wanted to make sure that the commercials are turned up loud. They couldn't care less about Jim Nantz and Tony Romo talking. I want to watch the game. There's just too much commotion that goes around during the Super Bowl. There, I feel better. Therapy can be different for everyone. That was very therapeutic for me. Most of us, though, have bigger problems than our favorite sports team or the Super Bowl. And it's important to get those things off of our chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on free Fire TV channels app. Okay, let's talk about the biggest loser for the Dallas Cowboys, and it has to be Tony Pollard.
It does have to be Tony Pollard. But I'm going to foreshadow here a little bit. I don't know. I'm kind of warming up a little bit to Tony Pollard. So we'll keep talking about that. But let's first review the season that Tony Pollard had, because everybody was very, very excited to see what was going to happen in his 5th season as an NFL running back. Finally had the backfield to himself amidst the departure of Ezekiel Elliott. It seemed like things were going to go well, right? After all, like, was so productive in 2022 as a backup running back, had over 1,000 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns, was super involved as a receiver, 370 plus receiving yards in 2022. And that was as a backup. So I think we were all a little bit befuddled when he had 6 fewer touchdowns in a starting role and, just under 60 fewer scrimmage yards. Again, with how many more touches? I mean, it was like over 70 more touches, fewer scrimmage yards, fewer scrimmage touchdowns. And Marcus, like, we've talked about this relentlessly. I do think so much of this has to go back to the lower body injury, the broken leg that Tony Pollard had. And what we saw, though, I think, early on in the season, that's sheer disappointment of the production from Tony Pollard really painted the picture of his entire season, because he didn't help us get to the fantasy football playoffs. But in weeks 11 through 18, man, did he absolutely crush it. Led the league in PFF rushing grade, 7th in yards per carry, and top 5 in missed forced tackle rate, top 7 in first down touchdown percentage. Like, he was absolutely so productive in the second half of the season that I do think it's largely gone unnoticed, just because of the fact that I mean, hello, like, he tanked our teams in the first 11 weeks. And I think that kind of painted the picture. But Marcus, I think the real tell for his dynasty value, because he did lose dynasty value this year, he's going to hit free agency this year.
Mm-hmm.
He looked healthy to end the year. So, didn't necessarily do himself a ton of favors throughout the NFL season, but closed off the year extremely strong. So I think the question and how we view Tony Pollard comes down to, what do we think is the future of Tony Pollard? What do we expect free agency to look like? I mean, among active running backs, ranks 25th in total touches. So, he's 26 years old. He'll be 27 this year, but he's still got, I think, a lot of valuable touches left in the tank here. So what are your expectations for Tony Pollard this offseason?
So I think it comes down to how many teams do you think are going to be willing to pay up for a running back? And when I mean up, I mean like not $6 million a year annually. I mean like $10 to $12 million a year. Like, is the list more than 3? Because I think the NFL has gotten very much where it's like, don't pay running backs, don't pay running backs, don't pay running backs. Are there going to be 3 teams out there that are willing to spend up for a running back? Because the reason I ask is because if I had to bet, I think Saquon Barkley is going to get the most money per year. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
Okay. And then I think number 2 is going to be Josh Jacobs because former first round pick, led the NFL in rushing yards and scrimmage yards in 2022. And he's only 25. I just think he's going to be the next guy that gets paid.
Okay, well, actually, let me interject in this exercise here too. Okay, so here's a list of free agent running backs. I want you to tell me where you think Tony Pollard ranks among these 6 running backs.
Okay.
Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, Tony Pollard, of course, DeAndre Swift. Where does he fall on the list?
3rd, pretty comfortably.
Okay.
Because he doesn't have the injury history that DeAndre Swift has. He's just been more durable outside of the broken leg. But even this year, he played all 17 games, and he's been more productive. I don't know if he's quite as good as the other guys. I would argue that he is, but I don't think across the NFL he's going to get paid like those guys. So I think it's 3rd, and that's just a really interesting spot to be in because I could see the league being like, here's a 1-year, $8 million deal, and that's the best you're going to get. Or I could see somebody like we mentioned on yesterday's show. I could see the Texans or maybe the Jaguars or somebody being like, hey, we need a player like Tony Pollard in our offense. If it costs us 2 years, $20 million, so be it. Let's get him on our team.
And, like maybe getting into a situation, I do think that Tony Pollard, the type of player he is, gives you a little bit more flexibility as a dynasty manager because obviously we saw in 2022 he can play a complementary role in an offense and still be extremely productive for fantasy football. I mean, 232 touches in the 2022 season, earned his Pro Bowl nomination, and he won some people some leagues here. And so like I think that is one thing to consider with Tony Pollard is that out of all of the free agents in this class, I would say that he's probably the least dependent on a full workhorse role. Yes. in terms of his fantasy production. So like that gives you some more potential landing spots where he could still hold a lot of value, but not necessarily need to be a 300 plus touch type of running back.
Yeah. Just to be clear, to show how much his value has dropped going into the month of October, he was 17.7 overall in your dynasty leagues. Now he is down to 64.6, being drafted as RB16. I think that's a little bit low, but it's noteworthy how much his stock has fallen. And that's despite playing all 17 games, and the raw numbers ended up not being too bad. But you just didn't get the game changer that I think a lot of people were hoping to get this season. We'll see if he can do it here in year 6. Okay, let's talk about the one player from this Cowboys team that you should be trying to acquire this offseason. We will get to him next. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total upfront so you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, Redeem promo code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. On tomorrow's show, we're going to be discussing the Eagles, some players that increased their dynasty value this season, some players that saw their stock dramatically fall, and then some off-season targets. So make sure you tune in for that. But Kate, let's wrap up this show by discussing the one player from the Cowboys that we are buying. Who is it for you?
It's still Jake Ferguson. It was Jake Ferguson last offseason when we did our 2023 season preview. And now that we're doing the season review, it's still Jake Ferguson, who I have to remind people just finished his second year as a tight end in the National Football League. I mean, Marcus, you look at what he's managed to accomplish over the past 2 seasons, has ranked third among tight ends in PFF receiving grade. You look at his ability to generate yards after the catch, ranks 7th in yards after the catch over the last 2 seasons. Yards per route run, it doesn't matter. Ranked 10th in yards per route run. Every single metric that I'm looking at from Jake Ferguson as a very young tight end in this league tells me that there's something there. And we've talked a lot about situation and how that can affect a player's, long-term outlook in Dynasty. I mean, Dak Prescott, he loves to utilize the tight end position among all quarterbacks with at least 1,000 pass attempts over the past 3 seasons. Dak Prescott has had the 5th highest quarterback target percentage in the National Football League, averaged 7.6 targets per game to the tight end position. And obviously, the Cowboys tight end room, it's a busy one, but I think we've seen this season that Jake Ferguson has established himself as the clear-cut top receiving option within this offense at tight end.
Yeah, and he's the number 2 receiver in this offense as well. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, Brandon Cooks is on a 1-year deal. I think Michael Gallup is going to be released this offseason. Jalen Tolbert is a nice player, but he's really more of a wide receiver 3. Jake Ferguson.
Anytime you describe a guy as a nice player,
he's a complimentary player. He's just not somebody that needs to be rostered in your dynasty league. But Jake Ferguson is that guy that in any single game can get you 12 targets, right? And because of Dak Prescott's efficiency, those are very valuable targets. And we know that he likes to use them down the middle of the field. We know that Dak likes to throw the ball into the end zone to the tight ends. I was shocked, Kate, when I went to Dynasty League football and looked at the ADP at tight end and saw players like Dallas Goedert and Evan Ingram ahead of him. Now, we had a discussion a couple weeks ago with Matt Williamson about David Njoku versus Jake Ferguson, and I get both sides of those. I'm good either way. I just think Jake Ferguson is going to be more steady game to game than Njoku. He's being drafted outside the top 11 tight ends right now, and I think on a week-to-week basis, we're going to be ranking him inside the top 6 because he just gives you that the floor is just so high. Go out and get Jake Ferguson right now in your dynasty leagues.
That's the thing I think cannot be understated enough. He might not have the kind of ceiling that a David Njoku has, but I do think his floor is much safer. Ranked 7th in targets this year. Didn't have a single game of 100 receiving yards or more, but tied for 7th in terms of touchdown production. Like, this is a situation that I think, because of his usage inside the red zone, ranked 3rd in red zone targets among tight ends, tied for the 2nd most end zone targets among tight ends this year. Like, I think that type of usage is going to be enough to raise that floor so significantly that, Marcus, obviously ceiling is great when it comes to the tight end position, but because of a lot of that volatility, like if you don't have a Travis Kelce or a Dalton Kincaid or a Sam Laporta, what I think you're looking for is stability. And that guy is Jake Ferguson for me.
I'm going to give you a couple of trades that I want your thoughts on. Jake Ferguson and a 2024 second-round pick for Kyle Pitts.
I'll take. Oof. This is actually a very, very hard one. I'll probably take Kyle Pitts.
I'm with you. I would take Kyle Pitts. This one's easy for me. Jake Ferguson for a 2024 second round pick.
Jake.
Yeah, easy. All right, here we go. We got another one. Jake Ferguson in a tight end premium league for Josh Jacobs.
Jake Ferguson. Easily.
Yeah. I think I'm
Running backs
there with
are
you.
loners. I'm getting a guy heading into his third season who I don't think we've seen the ceiling for just yet. Give me Jake Ferguson in a tight end premium because I mean, what do you think the realistic shelf life for Josh Jacobs'
A year.
fantasy value? It's going to be probably a year or two at the most. Give me Jake Ferguson for the long haul.
Now, this is the kind of trade that I love. So you're trading Devontae Smith, who I'm not as high on as other people, for George Pickens and Jake Ferguson.
Oh, I'll take Pickens Ferguson all day.
I think that's how you go out and get Jake Ferguson. You make him the other asset in a one-on-one trade, right? Where maybe you're splitting up a Devontae Smith into two pieces. And if you can get somebody like Jake Ferguson, who is a every week starter at the tight end position, you do that all day long. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go check out the shorts as well. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Modjuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. And we will see you right back here tomorrow when we are recapping the Eagles' 2023 season.